Hey guys, Tim with Little Crow Gunworks. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are working some more with our 6x45, our poor man's PPC. And now that we have the initial ladder test fired to test out the 3 different powders in that last range video, now we have some brass that we need to process. So this virgin Lapua 223 match brass has been formed up to, or sized up to 6x45 and fired one time. And at this point, with a Wildcat, especially after it's been fire formed, we think this is an instance where we think it's a good idea to anneal the brass. Now, people anneal brass for all different sorts of reasons. One very good reason to do it is if you're wildcatting, because remember we started with a 223 piece of brass and then we necked it up to 243. So necking it up that 20 thousandths does work hard in this brass a little bit. I wanted to get it fired one time before we anneal it, but other good reasons to anneal can be for consistency. If you're struggling with consistency in your sizing or your loads or your extreme spread, adding annealing or experimenting with annealing can be a good way to see if you can improve that. So in this video, I'm going to show you our annealing process using our Little Crow Gunworks Brass Annealing Mandrels. These are tools that we produce and sell that can be a very inexpensive way for you to dabble with annealing. At the time of this recording, I think we're selling these for $11.95. It's a very reasonably priced tool for you to just use a simple handheld drill and anneal your brass. So we're going to show that process. I'm going to anneal these cases, and then I'm going to check Headspace. I have removed all the primers, and we're going to use our World's Finest Trimmer number 2 as a headspace gauge to measure the headspace of these cases, so we know what the size is, if they formed all the way to the chamber and if they're a consistent size. And then we're going to use that measurement to size the brass and then check it afterwards and make sure that we got our 2 to 3 thousandths of shoulder bump that we need. And if everything sizes okay and comes out the way we want it, then we're going to put our trimmer back together here and trim the brass, probably just down to the shortest one. I'm going to find the shortest one of this batch and trim them all down to that size, and then we'll do the case mouth prep with our precision prep tool. So I'll show you guys all that. And then at that point, this brass has been fired once, sized appropriately for the chamber of our rifle, and it's ready to load and give us as good a data as it possibly can. It's been annealed to relieve that work hardening that we did by sizing it up 20 thousandths and firing it. So I'm going to walk you guys through all that, show you all that process, and then again, these brass will be ready to load. And then on the next video, we're going to go out and shoot the follow-up loads that I loaded, which are the sweet spots for LT30 and N133, and then a full ladder test for N130. So I just have an example here. I realize I haven't showed you guys this. So this is a piece of 223 brass, and this is our 6x45 with a Berger 87 grain VLD in it. So pretty sweet looking little cartridge. It almost looks like a scaled down 30-06 or something. So all right, I think what I'm going to do is turn the lights out and get the camera ready to go, get the torch going, and show you how to anneal this. The torch is a little bit loud, and so is the drill, so you're not going to be able to hear me very well. I've found in my experience with our brass annealing mandrels, you want to use a simple, inexpensive, I think this is a $19 pencil flame torch. So simple torch, doesn't have a built-in igniter, you have to light it yourself, and then it produces a pencil shaped flame. I think that's the best option for this, because the inner blue flame that's the hottest, you want the corner, I should say the corner of the shoulder right here on this big piece of brass, you want this part of the brass on the tip of that inner hottest flame. And then once you enter the flame, start counting, and I found about a 10 to 12 second count is about ideal using our mandrels. You'll see on some other people's videos with flame annealers, they heat the brass for a little bit less time than that, but I found because our mandrel is aluminum, it does draw a little bit of heat off of the torch and the piece of brass, so you have to do it for a few extra seconds to achieve an optimal result. So just wanted to share that. One other thing I want to say about annealing is that a good reason to do it, not only if you're wildcatting and, like I said, really working the brass, is if you have obsolete brass that's not in production anymore, or you're just trying to maximize the case life of the brass. Because what will happen, especially if you have like an older cartridge that's not super well designed and you're using standard type reloading dies, where you're not using a neck bushing to determine how much you're sizing down the neck. A lot of those older cartridges, you know, if a loaded neck is whatever, let's say it's 0.300, and when you fire it in the chamber, let's say it's a sloppy loose chamber and it goes all the way out to like 308, 309. So now it's grown by 9 thousandths, or let's say 8 thousandths, 4 thousandths a side. So now it's 308, and then you stick it in a standard full-length sizing die that doesn't have a neck bushing. That might be oversizing it back down. So now it's going from, it was at 300 when it was loaded. Now it's fired at 308. Then it might size it all the way down to like 295 or something to give you 5 thousandths neck tension. So now you have that 13 thousandths worth of growing. And if you're running that load any amount of spicy, that's really going to work hard in this brass and make it prone to splitting. And once the neck splits, it's going in the trash. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you're shooting older or more antiquated bottleneck cartridges like this, annealing can be very helpful to help extend your brass life. Even if you're not running it hot, that massive amount of, you know, it doesn't sound massive, 13 thousandths, it doesn't sound like that much, but that's a lot for brass to be expanding and then getting sized down over and over and over, especially if you're running mild loads and you're trying to get 20, 30, 40 firings out of your brass. That's a ton of work hardening that would help extend your case life if you're annealing. So a lot of different reasons to anneal. I just want to share that with you. I think now I'm going to get the lights out, torch set up. Okay, so for this I usually use my cordless drill, and I'll have it set on the lowest speed setting. You don't need to get carried away with this, and the amount of brass that sticks out of the mandrel is just enough to treat the area that you want to treat and anneal the area you want to anneal, and not any more than that. So see how this process works. You'll see once I enter the flame, put the tip of the flame on the point of the shoulder, keep it there for 10 to 12 seconds, and then I usually dump it in an empty cake pan to cool, and on to the next one. You see the case mouth starts to glow a little bit red. That's usually a good indicator that you're done. It takes a little while to get the feel for this. It's not a bad idea to pick up some brass at the range off the ground and experiment with it till you feel like you get the hang of it, rather than trying to learn on your expensive brass. Because the mandrel's aluminum, it does get hot, so it's not a bad idea to dip it in water every so often, or let it air cool after a certain number of cases, just so you don't overheat your drill. Because it is aluminum, it does soak up a lot of heat, so not a bad idea to cool it off now and then. Okay, so the annealing is done here, and as we can see, it's a little bit tough to see because these are smaller cases, but we have a perfectly consistent, pristine annealed finish. You see the heat affected area stops about the exact same place on each piece. There's a solid line you see right here, and then it slowly fades as we go down, and the top of the piece of brass, the case mouth and the shoulder, are nicely annealed exactly the way they should be. So now that we got that done, we're going to work on measuring our headspace with our trimmer and get to sizing. Alright, so now that we have all these annealed, we're ready to check our headspace and see how the brass grew into the chamber and see what dimension we get there once it's fire formed to the chamber. And then we can use that number as a reference to make sure that we're getting the appropriate amount of sizing. So in order to use our world's finest trimmers as headspace gauge, you want to measure, take the cutter out, so loosen your set screws, take the cutter out, and then you want to measure the overall length of the trimmer. Once you get a stable measurement there, you want to zero your calipers. So now that all we're measuring is the piece of brass. So we'll start with our first one, put the first piece in there. Looks like we're at about 1.093. Second piece, 1.0925. So our first one is the longest, so we'll set that one aside so far. 0.092. You don't have to measure all of them, you just want to get an idea of kind of a running average. 92.5, so that's about the same size as the first one. And some of them will be a little bit bigger than others. Sometimes if those were the, the hottest loads that you tested, generally the hottest loads are going to give you the highest number. .090, so that's quite a bit shorter than the rest. So we'll put that toward the back. So we want to make sure our die is set correctly based on the longest ones. .091, another shorty. 0.0925. Okay, so we have three that seem to be the longest out of the first 9 that I checked, 9 or 10. So we'll make sure our die is set correctly based on those. Alright, hit the cases with a little bit of the Still case lube. I'm going to size them. I've showed you how to do this process in our precision hand loading series. I think it was part 7, the bump sizing, our precision sizing video. I'll link that up in the corner so you guys can watch that in full if you haven't seen it. I'll show you, and that shows you how to appropriately set up your die to do this process and get the appropriate amount of sizing. So we wrote down we have 1.0925 on these longest 3. So we'll run these through the die, see what we get on the first pass. Check our first one. So with this brass we have 1.0965, so the die's got to get screwed in quite a bit. This die was set for the other brass that I was using, so this is coming out quite a bit different. So we'll want to adjust our sizing die and screw it into the press farther until we get basically 1.090. So we got about 6 thousandths we got to go down. Alright, so we got the die screwed in. Try this again. Looking for 1.090. There we go. Do the next one. So we see that we had 1.0925, and now we have the die set appropriately, and we're able to measure with our World's Finest trimmer to make sure we're getting our 2, 2.5, 3 thousandths shoulder bump, whichever you prefer. In this case, I'm doing 2.5. Zero 91505, right in there, 2 to 2.5 thousandths within half a thou. And this is the first firing, so not all of these grew the same amount, so they're going to size slightly differently, sometimes by half a thou or so. Alright, I'm going to get the rest of these sized up, and then we'll switch over to trimming. Alright, so now that we have the lube wiped off, what I'll do is zero my calipers, and then I'll measure the number of pieces and try to find the shortest one. So now that these are sized, the trim to length on this cartridge is the same as the 223, so you would only be trimming down to 1.750. As I mentioned in other videos, that number is fairly arbitrary. It doesn't really matter if you trim down to that number. What I'm going to do is look for the shortest one. So 7.51 is the shortest so far. These did grow a bit. Found a 49, that's our shortest one. The Lapua brass, when it's virgin, it's usually like 1.742 or 43. It's usually short of what you would trim to. So in forming this, size forming it and firing it and then sizing it, officially our first time through, see we did grow quite a bit. So this brass should be trimmed just to make it all uniform for the next loading. Okay, so the last two were 1.748. Those are the shortest ones. So that's what I'm going to set the trimmer to. And because of the way we sized it and checked our headspace using our trimmer housing, we know that because these were all sized the same within a thousandth or so, when we set this to the shortest one, that means it's going to trim all the brass to within a thousandth or so. Remember, whatever consistency we have to the shoulder with our headspace is the finished consistency we're going to have once we trim it. So now I'll just take one of these shortest ones, set the trimmer over the top of it, carefully install our cutter until it makes contact. And then if you don't want to take anything off of this piece, you want to hold the housing without pushing down on it. And slowly tighten that cutter on both sides. Alright, take our brass annealing mandrel out. Put the trimmer in. You guys can see the value of our World's Finest trimmer. It's got a lot of different uses, and then here's the main use is the speed and precision. Speed is second to none, and the precision, like I said, it can all be within a thousandth to a half a thousandth, depending on how consistently your brass is sized. Alright, so now that all the brass is trimmed to length, we can do our final prep steps and chamfer the inside of the case mouth, deburr the outside. The way our trimmer works, if you have a cutter that's in good working order, there really isn't a burr on the outside. I've just gotten the habit of deburring it slightly anyway, even though it's not really needed. You really just need to chamfer the inside of the case mouth to make sure the case mouth isn't shaving off jacket material. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can use automated electronic tools for this. A lot of guys are still using the old school double-ended, RCBS or Hornady chamfer and deburr tool, but we found over time that can be a little hard on your hands, especially because a lot of our customers are retirees, and holding onto that little tool gets to be fairly inconvenient and cumbersome. So Dale came up with this precision prep tool, which is a turret prep tool that has a bearing in the center and allows you to screw in whatever different prep tools you want to use. And because of that bearing, in order to chamfer and deburr, it's a quick matter of just putting a small chamfer on the inside of your case mouth. You just work your hand basically clockwise, right hand clockwise, and hold the piece of brass, and the tool does the rest. Very quick, easy way to finish your case prep. These tools are very popular because like I said, a lot of guys don't like the other different methods of using it and try to do as much of this stuff as they can without electricity. So for that crowd, this tool is very popular. And it's pretty handy for these smaller batches too. If you don't shoot big volume, you don't need the automated electronic tools for this step. But it's still more convenient than holding onto that little, two-ended hand tool. I have high hopes for this combination. This cartridge, as I've shown, is really incredible, and this little Berger 87 grain VLD, pretty good performer, pretty high ballistic coefficient, great target bullet. So I have high hopes that we're going to be able to get it to shoot well, and then we'll be taking it out and stretching it out at long range and show you what you guys can really do with even a small cartridge like this. Just a little 223 necked up to 6mm. Fun little cartridge that can shoot, shoot, kind of bench rust quality groups at short range, but can also shoot well at long range. I would say it's not going to be the best at either one of those jobs. At short range bench rust, there's better options like the real 6 PPC and 22 PPC, 30 BR, that sort of thing. And then, long range, obviously there's tons of different cartridges you can use, but to have a cool little unique cartridge like this that can do multiple different jobs very well, we thought was a really interesting concept, or for sure I did. Dale does too, but I thought it was great for what I wanted to use it for, which is primarily moderate range prairie dogs, maybe out to 350 yards, which it does an excellent job of. But because it's a 223 necked up, that means you're going to get more barrel life theoretically than a 223. So if I have, say, 5,000 to 6,000 rounds of accurate barrel life, that affords me the ability to have multiple loads for this thing and enjoy the rifle and the cartridge in many different ways. So really a cool concept that really interested me, and I've had a lot of different cartridges of all different sizes and from different disciplines and all that, but this one really interested me and I wanted to play with it, and I've just been blown away at the level of precision we can get out of even range pickup brass. So I thought, well, if it'll do this well with range pickup brass, I want to see if I use top shelf brass and top shelf bullets and powder and primers and everything else in a budget-minded custom rifle, what all we can wring out of this thing. And so far, it's been going really well. Alright, so now that all our prep work is done, we'll talk about what's next. I've loaded up a few different things to test after reviewing the video footage I was able to see that there were some spots worth testing with LT30 and N133. So we're going to test those. We had a few different spots here where sequential shots hit in the same place, like shots 2, 3, and 4 of the ladder hit all right in here, like sub quarter inch. And then I think 8 and 9 were up here, and then 13 and 14 were also in there. And 130, we're going to do an extensive ladder test that starts below the first charge weight and I think runs up to the 10th charge weight. And then N133, we had a couple spots too. Shots 4 and 5 are right next to each other here, probably sub 0.2, and then shots 8, 9, and 10 are this little trio right here that were sub 0.220. So these two did still show some promise. I'm not holding my breath that they're going to outperform N130, but I'll try them. We'll see what we get. So that'll be the next video. We'll be out at the range testing those few sweet spots and that full ladder test. But I think that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share with your buddies, all that. We'll see you on the next one.